morning, Facebook. It's Friday morning, y'all. I was just sitting here listening to a little bit of jazz, and I was thinking about something that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad wrote years ago that captures the state of our transitional condition. I repeat, it captures the state of our transitional condition. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad referred to our condition as being mentally dead, right? And he said that we are most in need of a spiritual resurrection, right? A mental and spiritual resurrection. A mental and spiritual resurrection that has a direct effect on our physical being and our conduct and how we respond to the world at large. You know, resurrection is the thing that's on, everybody's mind that believes in religion. Everybody's mind that believes in religion. Most people take the position which is given to them. Pardon me. Take the position which is given to them that the resurrection specifically applies to the coming up from out of the grave and living anew by the command of God, as promised by the prophets of God. That is a common belief. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad takes a different position in that. It is the core teaching of the Nation of Islam that there is no physical resurrection, right? That the resurrection applies to a mental resurrection, and that there is a greater spiritual resurrection, not of the spirit coming up out of the grave, but a spiritual consciousness and moral awakening of the teachings of God as they have been corrupted by the world at large. He defines the resurrection as the resurrection is that which makes the mentally dead see what causes them to be mentally dead. I'm gonna repeat that. He defines the resurrection as the resurrection is what makes the mentally dead see what causes them to be mentally dead. That's a unique perspective. We're going to approach that, but first I just want to look at what the common ideals and thought of the resurrection are, in movies and literature and prose, what the common person believes as they enter into the synagogue, the church, and the mosque. It is the physical expiration of a person, their life being over, they're being entombed in a grave through various means, right? And then a day comes when they're brought back to life, that their physical body is brought back together and they live again, right? Now, what's unique about this perspective is that every time this example is shown, right, you always see that the dead return to what's familiar to them. They come out of the cemetery and they go in the direction of home. It's, The Walking Dead, is a prime example of the common belief or the actions of the dead when they just come out of the grave, especially that which doesn't have a direct connection to God, just a reanimated body. It goes back to what's familiar to it, and it just circulates in that area, right? That's unique because prison is a concept of being socially dead. You're entombed in a mausoleum of sorts. and taken away from your social life, and your activity as it once was is terminated, right? So that you only exist in that tomb. And when you are released from prison, it's a sort of resurrection, right? And a lot of brothers who return home from prison or are resurrected, as the analogy would go, they have a tendency to return to their old life, right? Just as the dead do. That's unique, because in returning to their own life, they miss the essential ingredient that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said constitutes the resurrection. He said the resurrection is that which causes the mentally dead to see or perceive that which causes them to be mentally dead. So if you don't have that, if you don't have the perspective of understanding what puts you in a dead state in the first place, you're a reanimated body circulating back around in the places that's familiar to you, but mentally and spiritually, you're still a corpse. And we see this a lot with a lot of people who return to society, if you will, right? You know, they go back to the same old behaviors and the same old friends, you know, the ones who taught them the game and got them out there in the game, you know, becoming what's considered to be a domestic terrorist or a domestic exploiter. So you return back to doing the same thing, you know, exploiting your community and terrorizing your community in order to survive, eating the flesh, if you will, of your own people. You know, Rizza Islam dropped a nice piece, you know, probably some time ago, but I just looked at it last night when he was talking about, you know, how when our families are founded on the principles of self-preservation and value, that, you know, you have respect for the black woman and you have respect for the black children, and there's respect for the black man. But if the concept in the family is black men ain't shit and your dad ain't shit, you know what I mean, then the wife doesn't treat the man as if he's of value and significant. And the son is like, ain't no sense of me becoming a man if black man ain't shit. And then it becomes easier for a black male, you know, whether a youth or an adult, to kill another black male, so that we actually do the work that was formerly done by, you know, the enslaver and the slave master, right, inside of this society. Black people killing black people, whereas before it was other than black people killing black people and exploiting black people, you know, and because we are mentally dead to the value of ourselves, to the value of our life. So what do? We eat each other's flesh and we destroy each other. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that the resurrection, right, to resurge, to surge again, to have movement again, right, have vitality, is that which causes the mentally dead to see that which causes them to be mentally dead. We have to be aware of how we got into this condition. What occurred in our homeland, that's still occurring in our homeland. It ain't like they stopped. You know what I mean? There's a reason why a large number of Africans throughout the diaspora and throughout Africa have opinions about black people outside of their local region. You know, have these words that refer to us as not being really African, right? You know, this is something that was taught to them, where it was bred in them, in the same way that somebody from Philly might look at somebody from Harrisburg or Pittsburgh with a negative view and perceive them as being less value or less aware of being able to move and get things done. They be like, man, them niggas ain't from Philly. You know what I mean? And dudes from New York, I had the same concept with individuals from Philadelphia or from New Jersey. It's a concept that has been given to us by our adversary that make us look at each other in a less valuable and significant way. And this is what constitutes our death. It is the death of our community, you know what I mean, and our value toward each other, to see life, the same life in us that is in another. It is the death of our family so that we don't see our wife as our partner, right? Or something of value to protect and to lift up. We don't see our children as something of they crumb crushers, they debts. You know what I mean? They're not the offspring, which is the seed of our future. You know what I mean? They're a burden. You know, this is something that the society that we invests in us that we have to get out. We have to really concentrate on understanding what has happened to us to create this view that we now have of one another. You look outside your window or outside your car or down the street or across the street or right next to you, and you see another person that look like you, and in your mindset, you be like, that nigga ain't like me. You need to really understand where that comes from and how you became to think in that fashion. How kids that used to play with each other when they was growing up are now trying to kill each other. This is what the resurrection is in this day and time. You know, if there's another resurrection of it in that, I like to see it. You know, but right now, the resurrection that we need in this day and time is that which causes us to perceive what makes us other than ourselves and dead to one another. You know, numb, you know, absolutely against something, seeing each other as foul and as a stench, something worthy of nothing but death, and easily inclined to bring it about. That's the resurrection. That's the resurrection. That's the work. You know, changing that destructive mindset and bringing about an end to this death culture that our people have been thrust in. You know, if we thrusted ourselves in this culture and there was no outside influence, then, you know, we doomed. You know, it's a prison of our own making. But if there is outside forces, and there has always been outside forces that are working to engineer these attitudes and opinions and actions toward each other, then I submit to you that we have to do everything inside of our power to ensure that this culture of seeing each other in this fashion is uprooted and no longer exists. And if we are capable of doing this, and I think that we are, right, then you'll see that the resurrection of us into a substantial people of value will be not a thing hoped for, but a thing achieved. I greet you as I treat you in 360 degrees of peace and paradise in the Arabic language of Salam Allah and Salam Alaikum. Enjoy your day.